Hello everyone, my name is Ariana Garza and I will be presenting on language preference in English language learners in a predominantly Hispanic high school campus. The study was done over the last couple of months. I wanted to study this topic because I myself was an English language learner when I was in 3rd grade and had just moved to the US. I wanted to see what my students' language preference was in different settings. I did this study with the hope of understanding why they choose to speak certain languages at different settings, as well as determining whether the language they choose to speak interferes with their academic success. Here's a quick overview of the things that I will be discussing throughout my presentation. The introduction, a small literature review that guided me in creating the methodology and design of my research paper, the results, and a discussion of what the numbers mean. English language learners can have a difficult time learning content topics due to the deficiency in English vocabulary. Often, this gap can be reflected in their achievement success. Classroom environment and instructional methods of the teacher can guide the student to improve their English literacy, which in turn would persuade the student to speak English confidently in a class or social settings. This study analyzes the percent of students that choose to speak either English or Spanish in family, social, or academic settings, and what their actual preferred language would be. This study is the basis for further research that can then be done to see whether language preference has an effect on student achievement. The first article of 2 that I will discuss during this presentation is titled Narrative Abilities in Subgroups of English Language Learners and Monolingual Peers. I chose to discuss this article because even though these students are of a different age group than the participants in my research, it may help me have an idea of possible outcomes. The article compared the abilities of monolingual English speakers and ELL students when narrating in micro and macro structures. These students were approximately 5 years old. The researcher used ANCOVA to analyze the results of the study and found a linear model and regression. The results showed that there was a difference in microstructure narratives. However, the ELL performance was not significantly different than that of the monolingual English speakers. Based on this study, it would be expected that ELL students would have no significant difference in achievement scores than the students in advanced English literacy. The second article is titled Science, Inquiry, and Writing for ELLs, a Gateway for Building Understanding and Academic Language. This article discusses the struggle of ELL students in the science classroom. I was drawn to this article because I teach chemistry and wanted to see the researchers' thoughts on how inquiry-based science could help ELL students like mine. The article suggested intervention methods to prevent achievement gaps on the ELL students. Some of the proposed methods to improve student achievement of ELLs that the article discusses are implementing technology, integrating inquiry-based science instruction, and using science notebooks where students can write content at an academic language. When I first began my research, I strictly wanted to focus on a qualitative study, but later found that quantitative data analysis would be beneficial, especially to aid with the further research of comparing achievement scores. So I designed a descriptive correlational study. I wanted to see if language preference had a direct relationship in student achievement. I used mixed methods of data analysis. I gave 67 of my students at EDFR College Preparatory a survey and also conducted some interviews. It may be important to mention that this campus is located 10 minutes from the Reynosa, Tamaulipas border, and some of the students commute to and from Mexico every day. I used Google Sheets for the survey so that an Excel document with the student responses could later be downloaded. And then I would analyze these numbers. The survey contained 11 questions, some which were Likert scaled and other multiple choice responses. These are the questions that were asked in the student survey. There are definitely some flaws in these questions. One change that I would do for the methodology of my study would be to format the questions differently, perhaps even add more questions. I would include open-ended responses so that the questions have no bias or lead the students for a specific response. These are the results from my survey questions. I will only emphasize some of the responses. For example, question number 3 shows that 75% of the participants have always lived in the U.S. Because of this high percentage, I expected the value of English preference to be higher. But if you look at question number 5, about half of the students still prefer to speak Spanish in school. Most of the students speak Spanish at home, and 48% of these students speak a different language at school. If you compare the values from questions number 6, 7, and 8, I expected the students to prefer speaking the most Spanish to their friends, but that actually resulted in the lowest percentage. For question number 9 of the survey, students were asked their opinion on whether they believe themselves to be English language learners. And an English language learner was defined as someone who could still learn more reading, writing, and speaking skills in English. 66% of the students agreed that they were ELLs. However, only 37 of the 67 students are actually considered ELLs according to the campus. In question number 10, students had to answer their opinion on whether they agreed or disagreed that school should be taught in Spanish. Most of the students disagreed, 49% disagreed. This value is particularly significant because so many of the students disagree it should be taught in Spanish, but yet 73 of the students do prefer speaking in Spanish at school. Lastly, in question number 11, 43% of the students disagreed that they would practicing English, even though they may sometimes feel uncomfortable, would be beneficial to their English literacy. This value may be significant because it may represent that students would jeopardize their English language literacy and perhaps their achievement scores in account of being comfortable in class. I want to discuss some of the factors that may have influenced the student responses. The campus where the study took place has a great lack of diversity. 99% of the students are Hispanic, and the teachers are mostly Hispanic as well. I believe that the students have grown up at this campus feeling comfortable speaking Spanish, and no one does anything to change the classroom culture to English speaking. So it is possible that because of this lack of accommodations to push towards English literacy, the students now refuse to speak in English. To conclude, I believe that more student interviews should be performed to identify the gap that is seen in the results from the study. I would also do further research to see whether there is a correlation in preferred language of ELL students in an academic setting and their achievement scores. I would also propose to do research with a treatment and control group where I can see whether there is improvement in English literacy where the students are pushed to speak more English regardless of their comfort zone being tampered with. And I would suggest to the campus to do a better job at creating a safe space where the students and everyone can speak English without feeling judged and where everyone is speaking freely. This way, the students will not be allowed to continue speaking Spanish at all times of the day, which may in turn be hurting their achievement scores. Above is a list of the references that I used to guide my research design and my literature review and in the writing of my final paper. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If anyone has any comments or suggestions that may improve my research design or future research, please let me know. This was a great semester, and I hope everyone does awesome in their finals and has a wonderful summer.